Hello and welcome. My name is Sue Ellen Lazarus, and I'm the founder and director of the Martha's Vineyard Author Series and Book Festival. Thank you for joining us tonight for our fourth and final event of the season, a discussion on the important topic of the Black Lives Matter movement and the fight for racial justice. We're pleased that this new virtual format has worked well this summer, that so many of you have embraced it, and that it has allowed us to stay connected during this complicated time. A big thanks to many of you who've made contributions to allow us to do this free programming. If you've not already made a donation, please consider it tonight. There's that handy donate button on your screen. Your support has made this programming possible and helps keep next summer's book festival free. And in a show of great optimism, the festival next year will be on August 7th and 8th, 2021, here in Chilmark. We're grateful to the support of our sponsors, the Vineyard Gazette and the Chilmark Town Affairs Council, and also to Bunch of Grapes Bookstore for making sure you all get your books. There are a number of people who've worked very hard to bring this series to the island and to the virtual world. In particular, my gratitude goes to Annie Treitman, our event coordinator, Valerie Rosenberg, our chief operating officer, Kate Treitman, our social media master, and Vince Chimo, our technical expert. These events would not have happened without them. Or if they did happen, no one would know about them, or no one would hear them. Many thanks also to Billy Lazarus, the master of road signs, to Betty Frank Bailey, the treasurer of the Chilmark Town Affairs Council, to Melissa Patterson, who does our design work, and also to the Author Series Advisory Board. On the board for help planning this event this year, special thanks go to Pat Sullivan, Jessica Harris, and Dawn Davis. Music has been brought to you by Nanawi Vanderhoop and Evan Hall, with engineering by Andy Herr. So a quick primer on some Crowdcast features you should know about. The Buy the Book link sends you to our local bookstore, Bunch of Grapes. You can buy copies of David Blight's Frederick Douglass, Prophet of Freedom, and KICA's Layman's Heavy, an American Memoir. Other books to look for are Barbara Phillips's Essays and Voices of Civil Rights Lawyers, Reflections from the Deep South, 1964 to 1980, and Ken Mack's Representing the Race, the Creation of the Civil Rights Lawyer. Use the Ask a Question button to ask a question of the panelists. You can also vote on the questions others ask here. There's a chat window on the right side of your screen that allows you to make comments to the rest of the audience throughout the event. You can hide this window if you find it distracting. Click on the down arrow in the top right corner to make it all go away. We are recording this event, and the recording will be available, and it should be available just right after we finish. It will be available on our website, and all of the other events from this summer are already there on our website, mvbooksfestival.com. So turning to the event at hand. After the murder of George Floyd this spring and the events that followed, we felt it vital to include in our programming a discussion on the Black Lives Matter movement and racial justice. To do this, we are honored to have with us tonight David Blight, Barbara Phillips, KSA Lehman, and Kenneth Mack. David Blight is a professor of American history, African American studies, and American studies at Yale. He's also the director of the Gilder Lehrman Center for the Study of Slavery, Resistance, and Abolition. His definitive biography on Frederick Douglass won the 2019 Pulitzer Prize for History. He participated in the Martha's Vineyard Book Festival last summer, and we're delighted to have him back, joining us from New Haven, Connecticut. Kiese Lehman is a Black Southern writer born and raised in Jackson, Mississippi. He is a professor of English and creative writing at the University of Mississippi, and he served as the distinguished visiting professor of nonfiction at the University of Iowa in the fall of 2017. He's the author of 3 books, including the astonishing memoir Heavy, where he addresses both the personal and the political, race and family, body and shame, poverty and place. Kiese joins us tonight from Oxford, Mississippi. We wish he could be here on the island with us. And Barbara Phillips is a social justice activist, scholar, and writer. She was an associate professor of law at the University of Mississippi School of Law and a civil rights litigator specializing in voting rights. She's on the board of directors of the Women's Learning Partnership for Rights, and she's devoted her career to women's rights, voting rights, economic development, and social justice. She also lives in Oxford, Mississippi, but she joins us tonight from Oak Bluffs, Massachusetts on Martha's Vineyard. And tonight's moderator is Kenneth Mack. He's a professor of law and affiliate professor of history at Harvard, as well as the co-faculty leader of the Harvard Law School program on law and history. He's written extensively on issues regarding history and race, and is the author of several books, including Representing the Race, the Creation of the Civil Rights Lawyer. He lives in Newton, Massachusetts, but he spends time on Martha's Vineyard too, and we understand that he'll soon be here on the island. So with great pleasure, I turn it over to Ken and our distinguished panelists. Thank you so much. Here they come. Thank you.
Okay.
Welcome.
Well, first, thank you to Sue Ellen for that gracious introduction. Thank you to the Martha's Vineyard Author Series for inviting me and my fellow panelists. And thank you to the audience for joining us tonight. Our topic tonight is quite important, quite topical. Black Lives Matter, the Black Lives Matter movement, and the fight for racial justice. Tonight's panelists are uniquely qualified to address that question from the perspective of history, memory, writing, biography, law, and many others. Our format today is going to be a conversation. First, a conversation among the panelists. We're going to spend maybe about 2/3 of the time in a conversation between one another. And then we're going to invite the audience members to join the conversation by submitting questions, as Sue Ellen just explained, using the ask a question function. And as I said, it's going to be a conversation. I'm going to start by posing questions to the panelists, but it can go in any direction that the panelists and the audience want to take it. I invite the panelists to respond to each other. If I ask one of them a question, I invite the others to jump in and start a conversation. And in about 2/3 of the way, I'm going to invite the audience to do the same. Now, it seems to me that we've got 3 big questions to grapple with tonight concerning Black Lives Matter and the fight for racial justice. First, where does our current anti-racist movement come from? How do we arrive at this moment? Of course, there's the murder of George Floyd. There's the events of the last decade that have given rise to the Black Lives Matter movement. But, how do we get there? And I suspect that the panelists and many of you would tell different stories about how we arrived at this current anti-racist moment. Second big question I think that we've got to grapple with tonight is, what does our current anti-racist moment demand of us individually, of us collectively? What are the different ways of answering the question of what we, people who are committed to racial justice, or actually those who are not committed to racial justice, because we have a job of persuasion. What should we be doing in this moment? And again, there's going to be different there's going to be a variety of answers to that question. And finally, I hope before it's over, we're going to talk a little bit about how do we think about our moment going forward? What's the future? What's likely to be accomplished? Are we optimistic, pessimistic, some combination of the two, or is there some different attitude about the future of the movement for racial justice? Okay, so 3 big questions. These are all tough questions. I know we're going to get even tougher questions from our audience as we go along. So I think we should just jump right in. Starting our conversation, I'm going to pose the first question to Kiese. It's really inspired by reading your book, Heavy. In that book, you talk about lies and the temptation to tell lies, and how, in fact, you really want to write a different book, but that book would have been a lie. But of course, we're in this moment, this kind of racial justice moment, where we're telling many truths, but we're also telling lies. So what are we being untruthful about in this moment? Why is it so hard to be truthful about certain things? How would you answer that question just from your own perspective?
Oh boy, thank y'all so much. Thank you for that tough starting question. I want to just talk personally before I try to pontificate about like a larger political. I was born in Jackson, Mississippi. My father was a member of the Republic of New Africa when I was born. My mother moved to Wisconsin. She moved back to Jackson, Mississippi, and I can't remember a time when my mother wasn't involved in organization and movements. And one of the things that I think BLM has nudged us and sort of obliterated is this notion of the purity of like the traditional race man. And I think sometimes before I start talking about like what BLM has pushed back against in terms of state sanctioned violence, I think we need to talk about what BLM has pushed back against in terms of like the myths we tell ourselves about American movement in general. I think a lot of us know that movements don't just spontaneously like combust. They're impossible without organizations. Power U and the Dream Defenders were pivotal in creating what we now call BLM. And as most of us know, Alicia, Patrice, and Opal who were organizers before BLM was actually created, are foundational to this movement. So I just think one of the things that I've lied to myself about, and I've been lied to about, is that like these movements historically have been run by like these pure-hearted race men. Thankfully, before I start talking about what BLM has done and pushed back against and helped create policy-wise, I just think that BLM has helped demystify and really helped me stop lying to myself about like who leads particularly like Black liberation movements in this nation and who will lead Black liberation movements in this nation. And I think it's also helped us think about the importance of the way gender and sexuality have to be as radically sort of obliterated and reconstructed just as white supremacy has. And I don't think any other substantial movement in my life has done that kind of work. So I think BLM has helped us get closer to truth telling. And that's before I even start talking about the way it is attempting to assault the nation's assault on Black lives.
Okay. All right, great. Any of you want to jump in? Are we lying about anything in the present? Should we be engaged in truth telling? What's right or wrong about the stories that we're telling about our present anti-racist movement?
Well, I think there are lots of lies that we in the United States have been telling ourselves. David, you're probably and you are probably familiar with James Lowen's interesting book to read, Lies My Teacher Taught Me. And we just got a good dose of that about a month ago down in Oxford when one of the white supremacists spoke before our county board of supervisors in opposition to taking down the Confederate flag. And he explained to them that all this stuff that they were hearing about that monument, that Confederate soldier on the square being about slavery, that was ridiculous, that the Civil War was not about slavery. He remembered his 7th grade teacher telling him all about how the Yankees tried to impose a 10% tax on cotton. And that was the reason that we were all in the Civil War. So we got lots of, we've got people who've been raised on lies on top of lies. And we've been lied to, as Kiese is saying, about, where movements come from, who are the movement leaders. We've had, young people become immobilized because of the mythology of the great man leading the movement. I saw young people in a convening organized by Marian Wright Edelman, sitting with Bob Moses and other folks from the movement. And the young people could hardly speak because they were so, mesmerized at being at the feet of these, great people and the young people articulated, they said, you all always knew what you were doing. And when the young people said that, Bob Moses and everybody else just cracked up laughing. And they said, that's what you think? I mean, that keeps you from doing something, And they explained to these young people that in the movement, we so often didn't know what we were doing. We had a song for it. And it was called Do What the Spirit Say Do. And they would sing that song over and over and over again until the community came together and figured out what they were going to do. So we've told lots of lies to ourselves about social justice movements, and white folks have been telling all kinds of lies about everything.
I know that's right.
Well, I would just add to this lie conversation. Is my sound coming through all right? Because I seem to be behind my own voice. Okay, good. I just reviewed a book called Wilmington's Lie by the journalist David Zucchino. It's about the 1898 coup, massacre, riot, it goes by many names, in Wilmington, North Carolina, which was really a pogrom. It was this massive effort by white supremacists in North Carolina to not just take over Wilmington, which had become a black-run city, but to take over the whole state of North Carolina. It's an incredible story that still most Americans don't know. It was an American coup d'etat, an American pogrom. But the story of it for 60 years, 70 years, even longer, was essentially a series of lies created by the perpetrators first, and then their apologists and their descendants. But let's not leave the lie question until we talk about the fact that the lies from the top in this country right now are just daily something to behold. We have a presidency that simply operates by them, and 40% of the country never checks him. They don't care. They just buy in. They follow. And it's telling us something about the power of whichever mythology you want to identify, but the power of a strongman mythology in our culture. I'm not sure most of us were prepared to fully understand that it was possible for a Donald Trump to happen. But he's not only happened, he has seized the federal government and has begun to alter, if not ruin, many of its institutions. So, that old story about the big lie is alive and well. Tell it enough times, a lot of people believe it.
Okay.
And I just want to say, but and yes, and I think it's important just for me to remind myself that this particular singularity of like this monstrosity of a liar in Donald Trump, I think whether I want to admit it or not, the table was set for him with I think the previous presidents. I think I just think about this moment when Hillary Clinton was standing up. She got Barack Obama on stage. She was running for president, and she said, "America is great because America is good." I teach language. I teach English. If any of my students wrote that sentence, I would turn that shit back to them and say, what is that? Not only is this a lie, you cannot substantiate that claim. And so I'm not at all equating Hillary Clinton or Barack Obama or any other liberals or neoliberals with Donald Trump. But I think it's important for me to always remind myself that the table of lies was set for this monstrosity of a liar, but it was still set.
Yeah, but your students aren't running for office.
Right.
Well, no, I hope some of them do. I hope some of them are. But at that moment they're writing, they're not running for office. Anyway.
Right.
Okay. All right. So next question. I think I'm going to ask a question of Barbara, although I'm sure all of you all will jump in. Barbara, you both grew up with the civil rights movement and have spent much of your life engaging with its legacy and law and policy. And when I say you grew up with it literally. You were among the first 4 Black children to integrate R.J. Reynolds High School in Winston-Salem. You become a community organizer in Mississippi. You help Black officials get elected when, nobody had elected anybody like that before. You went to law school. You've done all these things in your career. But then we arrive at this moment where we're in a big debate about law and legal institutions. Some people say defund the police and prisons. Some people say defund the criminal justice system. Some people say that we shouldn't even call it. My colleague, David Harris at the Charles Hamilton Houston Institute at Harvard says we shouldn't even call it the criminal justice system. So we're in a struggle over law and legal institutions, and in an era in which many activists are deeply skeptical about legal strategies, legal institutions, legislation, politics, voting. What do your set of experiences say to our moment and the skepticism we feel about law in the present?
Well, I think law, the legal profession, and the civil rights movement of the 60s has earned that skepticism. I think about where we are at this intersection of law and activism as being a very long continuum. When we had the first Reconstruction, we had the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments to the Constitution, which gave us an opportunity to refound this country, because we, the people, had not included those newly freed people just coming out of slavery. We weren't included in the original We the People, who were supposed to be involved in forming a more perfect union, and the very next thing is establish justice. I mean, that's the very next thing that this union is supposed to be about. But we weren't included in it until the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. We started making some progress with legislation, and then we had a Supreme Court and a political climate that turned its back on this reformation, transformation of our original founding. And we had the demise of the first Reconstruction. Reconstruction only lasted till 1877 at best. And the law engaged with politics to create that demise. And then it took people. What happened after the demise of the first Reconstruction? It took people power. It took organizing. And there was again an intersection with law as Charles Hamilton Houston and folks at the Legal Defense Fund started mounting a legal campaign that was embedded in the movement campaign. And that brought us the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and 63. We had Martin Luther King on the, on the mall, saying, we're in the moment of the urgency of now. And now is the time to fulfill our promise of democracy. And you know what happened? As soon as we got the 64 Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, the Supreme Court and the Republicans rode right in and set about the demise of the second Reconstruction. And we got the term, instead of talking about justice and white supremacy, which is what the civil rights movement was talking about, We all of a sudden heard from Justice Powell in the Supreme Court, we heard about diversity. And diversity is the Trojan horse that we have been riding back into the 19th century ever since. There is no principle. There's no principle of justice in diversity. And that has brought us to where we are now. And so what I see is the Black Lives Matters movement is talking about racial justice, is talking about white supremacy, all those words that we progressives and a lot of Black folks removed from the conversation because we got all caught up with diversity. Now, these kids have got us talking about white supremacy and racial justice and racism and systemic racism. And it's a new day, and the lawyers are going to have to catch up. So I think we are having faced this demise of the second Reconstruction, which has been the project of Republicans for the past 50 plus years. Kiese is right. Trump didn't just, pop out, full blown. As Barack Obama said, at some moment, he figuratively turned to the Republicans and said, "What took you so long?" They decided to oppose Trump as a candidate. But anyway, so here we are. I think Black Lives Matters brings us to a moment where we have the potential for a third Reconstruction, and the law is going to have to catch up. Yeah. And I think we can, but only if civil rights lawyers critically examine where we fell short during the second Reconstruction. Yeah. I really have tried to engage my colleagues in that conversation. Where did we as lawyers, and where did law as an institution, those are two different questions, fall short during the second Reconstruction, that we have landed with diversity and ended up here where we are yet again talking about the urgency of now.
Ken, you may have another question for me, but could I jump in on that point that Barbara made so well? Yeah, everything is a long continuum. This is what history is, isn't it? We're constantly trying to teach young people to have a long view. And when you're young, you're not always interested in a long view. Don't give me that long view stuff. I want it now, right? But also, every revolution has a counter-revolution. That's another thing. There are very few laws in history. I don't really believe in laws of history. There are some cycles and all that. But every revolution has a counter-revolution. Watch out. When you've won a victory, you think you've won something. Watch out. Get ready. And look what happened in the wake of 8 years of the Obama administration and all the changes that we thought that brought. But also here, this long continuum, and I think that's part of what has happened here with Black Lives Matter. It's part of what certainly happened in the not even 2.5 months since George Floyd, is that we're experiencing what we always have. It's what I like to call the shock of events. There are events in history that force everybody to reposition themselves. Fort Sumter, Pearl Harbor, John Brown's raid, on and on. The Selma March and the beatings there that led to the voting rights signing by LBJ. There was no guarantee there was going to be a voting rights that year. But after that march, it happened. There's so many others, even during Reconstruction. I mean, those riots in Reconstruction in Memphis and New Orleans in 1866 shocked the Northern population. They said, "Oh my God, we got to do something about this. They're murdering people. They're committing virtual pogroms on black neighborhoods in New Orleans, Louisiana." So George Floyd, for reasons I don't think we even have a good historical analysis for yet, it happened during a pandemic. People were already so anxious. Black Lives Matter was already 7, 8, 9 years old. It came after a long series of these episodes of police violence and police killings. But it became that shock of an event that transformed people all over the world. One of the most remarkable things about Black Lives Matter is that the phrase, the protest movement, the issues are the same, well, in different variations. They're the same ones in Australia. They're the same ones in Denmark. There are people all over the world talking about Black Lives Matter and applying it basically to their own society. This is a moment, without going into too much hyperbole, that is one of those shocks of events that is forcing everybody to reposition themselves. And then, of course, it comes in an election year with this, this obviously hugely important election and all this fervor to try to throw out this regime or to save it on the other side. So, we're experiencing a kind of 9/11. It's a different event. A kind of Pearl Harbor. It's a different kind of an event. But it is of that, I think, weight in comparative history. And, we can, and when if Trump is gone, Trumpism is not going to be gone.
Right.
Trumpism is going to be laying around everywhere. And they're going to be like little grenades laying in the leaves, waiting to happen. So anyway, everything's a long continuum, punctuated by these shocks. We just had one. We're still having it.
I would add to that yes, and in 2015. I was asked to talk about Black Lives Matters movement and what it meant. And just a week or so before I was going to discuss it with some women, the New York Times Magazine published a long article that purported to explain to us what Black Lives Matters was all about, right? We became familiar with the hashtag in 2013. This is 2015, so we've had 2 years to look at what it's doing, what it's about. And it was one of the silliest pieces of journalism I've ever read. And I am being generous when I say its 3 points were that all it is about is the plea to stop killing us. That's all it's about. The second thing was that it is leaderless. They got no leaders. And the third thing was it's just something on Twitter. I swear, that was what the accepted wisdom was about what this Black Lives Matters was all about in 2015. Well, that isn't what it was about in 2015. And what has been, it is part of that continuum of organizing. It is a part of that continuum of Occupy Wall Street. And as a Black Lives Matters movement, it was moving on the ground all over this country. Well, the New York Times Magazine thinks it's something on Twitter. So, its vision right out of the box, in 2015, Alicia Garza received an award from the Equal Justice Society in San Francisco. And she spoke there about what their movement was all about. And she said, we deserve to live in our full humanity. And dignity. She said that is what this movement is about. They knew what they were about, and that was a statement of values and a statement of their goal. And it goes right back to the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments that gave us Reconstruction and are the values upon which we are supposed to be reconstituting and transforming this nation. And she knew it, and the folks that were involved in Black Lives Matters knew that they were about that kind of serious business.
Okay. I'm sorry. Go ahead. No, go ahead. There's a conversation. Let's just keep going.
Yeah.
But Ken, we want to let you in here. Come on, man. Since Barbara brought up 2015, let's not miss the point either that 2015 was Charleston. And talk about a shock of an event. Here was this white supremacist maniac kid, inspired by neo-Confederate nonsense, or craziness, murders 9 people in a church. And that brought about the beginnings of the thrust against all things Confederate, symbols, monuments, plaques, you name it. That summer, and then in the ensuing couple of years, and now since George Floyd, this question, and believe me, as one who spent his entire life in this field of slavery, the Civil War, and Reconstruction, none of us ever thought we'd see those major Confederate monuments come down. It just wasn't going to happen. Black Lives Matter has a lot to do with that. And all we need to do is look at the pictures of Monument Avenue in Richmond, where basically Black Lives Matter activists took them over. The police got out of the way. They just took over. And they started projecting those incredible images on the monuments.
Yeah.
That's one of the greatest images, frankly, that's come out of these weeks and months. But the Charleston massacre is going to be here I am trying to write the history of this, and I don't know what the history of this is going to be. In 20 years, there'll be a great book on this, or 50 great books on this. But that Charleston turning point is huge in this. And it comes after, about 3-4 years of recurring police killings from Trayvon Martin on. And many of the activists who were out there protesting against the monuments were Black Lives Matter activists.
Yeah. Well, and many of them are white folks coming to a new reckoning of their world. There is now, a shared reality. I mean, we have had over 30 communities in Mississippi have had Black Lives Matters marches, not majority Black. I mean, in the town where Kiese and I live, white folks have been just marching with their handmade signs all over the place. And they're trying to take down the Confederate statue on the square. We've had Black Lives Matters marches in little towns in Mississippi of 3,000 people and 6,000 people. And it's a whole bunch of white people out there with their Black Lives Matter
towns. I mean, it's hard to believe. Little towns in South Dakota, towns in Montana. I mean,
there you go.
It's never happened before. It's just never happened. So I just hope it can be harnessed in November. That's my hope.
Yeah.
Okay. I want to, I've got more questions, but I actually want to pose a question to the panel that derives from the questions that have been submitted by the audience. And I should remind our audience that you can submit questions, you can vote on questions, you can kind of get them to the top of the list. I can't guarantee you're going to get through all of them. But here's a really interesting question that that's on the list. Somebody asks this: what needs to be done here on Martha's Vineyard, and how can we help? And I take that question to be, okay, we've got we've got a large audience out there tonight, many of whom are on Martha's Vineyard, some of whom are not. Martha's Vineyard is a complicated place with a lot of different kinds of people who are there in various parts of the year. Some of the stereotypes don't hold. But if you all wanted to speak to our listeners tonight and recommend that they do something, how should they act? What does the moment demand of us, the people who are viewing this this tonight? What would you recommend? What are the range of things that our audience should be doing, either on Martha's Vineyard or more generally?
I think that's it. Go ahead, Kiese.
I mean, I've never been to Martha's Vineyard. I just know what Martha's Vineyard, I think I know how it exists in the American imaginary, at least the Black American imaginary. And I mean, a frank answer to that is I think Martha's Vineyard, as it exists in the popular American imaginary, has to be destroyed. I don't mean that hyperbolically at all. I think that if we're interested in any sort of liberatory actual action, I think what I think of when I think of Martha's Vineyard cannot exist in a liberatory nation. Now, are the people who live on Martha's Vineyard, who visit Martha's Vineyard, going to seek to destroy it as it currently exists? I don't know. But if we're not talking about the destruction of coddled places, and by destruction, I don't simply mean just the physical destruction, but if we're not talking about the destruction of these coddled sort of like elite places, many of which I've gone to school in, I just think this sort of is just an intellectual exercise So that would be my answer to people who live on Martha's Vineyard who want to know what we have to do on Martha's Vineyard. You got to destroy that shit.
Okay.
I think that's right. And if we think of it as you don't get to transformation by just, putting a little lipstick on.
Right.
You got to do a little more than that. And I think it is an intensely local, state, national, kind of answers to that. But I think the way to get to the answer for folks on Martha's Vineyard and those of us wherever we are is to put down white fragility and pick up how to be an anti-racist, because that's about doing something to destroy what is racist about what we're doing and how we're doing it, and about how you act to transform your reality. So that's I would ask everybody to pick up that book and to pick up Nancy McLean's book, Democracy in Chains. And I think that will give all of us a way to find our roadmap.
Can I just add to that? I've been to the Vineyard. I don't go there regularly, but I've been there. I'm not going to tell people on the Vineyard they have to destroy it. Casey, I understand your point. Everybody needs a place to rest. All cultures, all peoples need a place to rest. But what everybody on the Vineyard can do, and wherever else they live, and what everybody in this country can do, is be citizens again. Be a citizen professor, be a citizen banker, be a citizen teacher. God knows the teachers have to be citizens now. We're all trying to reinvent how we teach. Be a citizen policeman, be a citizen. Citizenship, be a citizen, be engaged.
And I would just say, in addition to being,
no matter where you live, you can be a citizen.
Right. And I think what I would hope is sort of welded into like being a good citizen is being a radical sharer. And again, because we're only talking about Martha's Vineyard, I think that if people who live on Martha's Vineyard, again, a place that only exists in my imagination, were radical sharers, right? Everybody does need a place to live, but some people, David, have 3 or 4 places to rest their head.
Oh, I know.
At Martha's Vineyard, right? And so one of the things that I would say, and again, this is because the question was asked, is what does radical sharing look like for residents of Martha's Vineyard? And how do you radically share with people who don't have one safe place to lay their head? Yeah. And what I'm saying is, if you radically share and you radically bring folks to Martha's Vineyard who actually essential workers who need multiple places, multiple days, multiple years to rest, I think Martha's Vineyard, as it exists in the American imaginary, ceases to exist. So I'm saying that is one way I think you destroy Martha's Vineyard and embolden this sense of good citizenship / radical sharing that I think all of us would be proponents of.
And yes, we have plenty of people right here on Martha's Vineyard who don't have a place to lay their head. Not everybody here is in their second and third home. We got a bunch of folks here got no place to lay their heads. We've got an affordable housing crisis on this island. We got people who don't want it in my backyard. And when you come here to rest, I hate to tell you, you're still gonna be Black. And we've got that on this island. So we have things to deal with here.
Right.
The Vineyard has lots of social justice issues, no question. But you know what? I'll also say just one other quick thing. This is really getting to be fun. It's true that people with 4 houses ought to think about that. And maybe they could do something socially useful, at least one of them, make a school out of it, something.
Right.
On the other hand, you're not going to really change that until you change some laws, some legislation, until you change a tax.
Laws and policies. There you go.
Yeah, policies have to change in this country. We have to legislate ways to get to stop this massive inequality that has been growing like crazy for the last 20 years, ever since Reaganism, really. So that doesn't happen just by appealing to somebody's conscience. It just doesn't.
Yeah. But I think we're in the midst of that happening now, because everybody is experiencing except for Trumpsters, because they're just in a world of their own. Because I mean, what's the journalist Masha Gessen
Yes.
in that book, How to Survive in Autocracy, she talks about a family where everybody in the family has COVID-19 and they still believe it's a hoax.
Right.
I mean, so let's just put them aside, and realize that the rest of us, most of us, understand that we are in a catastrophe of proportions that no one has ever experienced before. We've got COVID, the pandemic. We've got economic dislocation. We've got the visibility of state violence. We've got white people now understanding what white supremacy is all about. They had to see that. They had to see that we have a shared reality that I think is part of what makes the response to Black Lives Matter different, and what gives me hope that we really are about to be into a third Reconstruction. Because for most of us who are not on Fox News, we have a new shared reality, and that makes me hopeful.
Okay.
Yeah, I think there is a pending third Reconstruction, but that all depends on election days, just like the first one did. Only when the radical Republicans disfranchised Confederates and enfranchised Black men in the South did they put in place radical Reconstruction, which only lasted 4 or 5 years, and when the counter-revolution, until the counter-revolution came.
That's right.
We need to win elections and legislate our way to a third Reconstruction. There's a lot of work to be done.
That's right. And impeach some of those federal judges and some of those folks on the Supreme Court who are unqualified to be there.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, one of the best arguments we can make.
Federal judges can be impeached. I want people to know that.
Oh, the first impeachments in American history were of federal judges. Not
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
For
we
things
need
like
to get that rolling.
Anyway.
So I want to just ask one more question in our conversation among ourselves before I really open it up to the questions that are on the queue. And I see we've got 16 questions on the queue. I urge our audience to ask your questions, vote questions up. But here's our exit question for our conversation before we kind of get to the conversations on the queue. The future. And I'm going to ask this to the person who, like me as a historian, should be most reticent about talking about the future, David Blight. But you all can kind of jump in. Okay, we're in this anti-racist moment. We've been in a Black Lives Matter moment for almost a decade now. We're, all kinds of things are being talked about, done, Confederate monuments, reparations for slavery. What do we imagine in the future? If we want to look forward, what do we think is going to be accomplished because of this moment? Maybe it's too early to know. This is the historian's answer.
Yeah, well, thanks for the easy one, Ken. I believe me, in the last couple of years, with this biography of Frederick Douglass, I've been, given hundreds of talks. And I used to try to bat this question away. What would Douglass say now? What's the future hold? I used to say that's counterfactual. Historians don't do that. But you can't do that anymore. Mm-hmm. People want to know, how can history make us understand now and act tomorrow? They really want to know that. Mm-hmm. More than any other time in my life, I think this is true. Look, I'm a kind of pragmatic, hopeful pessimist, even though that seems contradictory. I try to control expectations about these things because I know change tends to be slow. I do not believe that the arc of justice or the arc of history bends toward justice. Sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't. And every time I used to hear Obama say that, I used to say, God, that's beautiful, but
what does it mean?
No, it doesn't. That's not right. I mean, look at the 20th century. The whole, God, Anyway, what I can be hopeful about is, in this moment, is our work. whatever profession we're in, but especially ours, we're all teachers here. We're scholars, professors, teachers. Our educational apparatus in this country is in trouble. God knows it's in trouble. Public schools are in such trouble. No one even knows how to open a classroom right now. Universities are going to struggle like crazy this year to figure out even how to operate. We all know that. But our purpose on this planet is to inform people and to educate people, to be citizens, to be informed citizens, to care about their institutions, to care about their societies. The voter turnout among young people is still ridiculous. And the highest voter turnout among African Americans was Obama's second election, and it was only 66%. Think about that. Think about how many African Americans still don't even vote. Why not? There are a lot of reasons. So I think what we can actually hope for is winning an election, throwing out most of the Trumpists. Some of them will ultimately be in court over their performance, but it's going to take a good deal of time to legislate ourselves toward a new day. And I noticed a question here among the questions. Somebody asked for, give us one thing to wrap our heads around for this third Reconstruction. I don't have the silver bullet, folks, but how about making Section 1 of the 14th Amendment absolutely real? How about getting every American to carry around a little card that has Section 1 of the 14th Amendment? That's the Equal Protection Clause. That's the birthright citizenship. That's the Due Process Clause. How about we make that a new American vow? Make it the new American motto. We're going to make the 14th Amendment absolutely real. That we can be the most multi-ethnic and multiracial people in a nation that the world's ever seen and live under Section 1 of the 14th Amendment. That would be a hell of a start. And I agree, Barbara, that word diversity has just been overused. God, every mission statement you read, a company, a university, it's all diversity, and nobody knows what it means.
Yeah.
Let's just banish that one and let's talk about equality. Let's talk about natural rights and human equality. Diversity just means...
Let's talk about dignity and justice.
Yes.
How about
diversity
that?
is being nice or something. I don't want any niceness. I want equality. I want real legal change. And from that can come, bigger kinds of change. But look, until we can begin to carve away at this tree of economic and racial inequality at the heart of our society, we're gonna remain sick.
Yeah. Well, I think if we pay attention, one of the first orders of business in this third Reconstruction is to pay attention to our right to vote. I mean, this is something that for the past, 50 plus years, the Republicans have been determined to undermine. And Joaquin Avila, who was one of the greatest voting rights lawyers in modern voting rights litigation, really understood that voting rights is all about power. It's all about power, and it's all about empowering people and their communities. And that is, as we can see now, I mean, the Trump and the Republicans are doing everything they can and have been doing everything they can to suppress the vote. I mean, as soon as the Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act, we had over 31 states passed over 200 voter suppression pieces of legislation. We've got them now going after the post office, so you can't vote by mail. The vote is where we have to really mobilize, turn out. This is how we change policy. This is how we actually do democracy in this country in conjunction with people's movements. But we have got to pay attention to what is being done to our right to vote and participate fully as citizens. It is absolutely crucial.
Yeah, and I'll just say that my fear about progress and promise in this nation are rooted in the my reality that what we call American progress often precedes spectacular Black death. And so I'm interested, whether we're talking about, contemporary history with the monuments coming down this summer, or we're talking about Charleston, or talking about Reconstruction. Now, I'm interested in if you all can imagine the sort of promise or hope or progress that I think a lot of people want us to believe in. Can that happen without more spectacular Black death? And or are Black death and presumed progress in this nation, do they work hand in hand?
Well, I would say we've had pretty spectacular Black deaths when you just look at the deaths at the hands of police. I mean, between, 2015 and 2020, over 5,000 people were shot and killed by police, most of them Black. I don't know how much more spectacular. We've watched
Right.
the murder of George Floyd. We've watched it, we've seen it. Bless Steve Jobs for giving us these phones with cameras.
Yeah.
I mean, because this is, but for those cameras, the response would have been, it didn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
You Black folks just imagine everything and blah, blah, blah. So, I'm hopeful that we don't need to have any more spectacular Black deaths.
Yeah.
We need a new
I want to say one more thing. Everybody ought to be worried. I'm a voting rights lawyer, I can't help it. But the Supreme Court just here lately threw up its hands and said, Jesus, take the wheel, when it was confronted with partisan gerrymandering. And that is severely rotting what democratic institutions we have left. Partisan gerrymandering by Republicans has become severe. And we've got a Supreme Court that says, gee, that's just too bad.
Yeah, but Barbara, again, here's where legislation comes in. And, Obama basically said it in his eulogy to John Lewis. Let's have a national holiday for voting.
Yes.
Let's have instantaneous registration at
the new Voting Rights Act, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act.
Absolutely. A new Voting Rights Act. Let's have 1 month national early voting everywhere.
Automatic voter registration.
But,
all
this
that
has to happen out of a political coalition that wins big time at the polls first.
I agree.
That's the initial problem. I agree with you. The right to vote is at the core of all of this. And, I'm still struggling how to talk to some young people about the right to vote. Some of them just don't think it matters. And I don't think you have to be getting old to realize that voting matters.
Yeah. Well, you might direct them to some of the recent writings of Angela Davis. Maybe they'll pay attention to her.
Oh, yeah. Oh, they do pay attention. She came here to speak at Yale. It was the last year or the year before. And my God, they couldn't find a hall big enough.
All right. Well, she wants them to get out and vote.
I know she does.
For themselves. And you're right. I think that's what's important about what Angela Davis said, right? She's like, go out and vote for yourself.
For yourself. Exactly.
Yes.
But, I think she can help them realize it is for themselves.
Right.
But you know what? I'm going to slightly, for the hell of it, I'm going to slightly disagree. I don't think we vote as individuals. All this one person, one vote stuff, it's a nice idea. We vote as groups. And if you don't vote, you let your group down.
Yeah.
You vote as a woman, you vote as a Black person, you vote as an educator, you vote as all kinds of things. And if you don't vote, your group lost you. You let down your team.
Yeah.
But people always want to know, what have you done for me? What have you done for me? What have you done for me? It isn't just about me. It's about the groups we're part of. We care about schools and education and so on and so forth. Vote for that reason.
I think Black folks and other people of color understand that part of it.
I think they do. Yeah. They've always been voting.
Empowering the community.
Yeah.
When we did voting rights litigation in Mississippi, or we did it in California, representing Chicanos and Latinos, it was about community and building institutions in the community, building leadership in the community. The only folks doing all this individual stuff is white folks.
Right.
The rest of us know our lives depend on our communities
Right.
and what we do.
Right.
Except for those 10% of black Republicans. You got to explain them sometime.
When you can explain the white women who vote for Trump, I'll explain.
No,
That's what I'm saying. You know, you mean to tell me
I didn't even get near that one. I don't
only
know.
10% of us are fucked up? Like, that's amazing. I'll take those odds any day.
Yeah, 90% is pretty good of any group of people.
Pretty
Of
good.
any group of people. And they've always been black conservatives since day one. There's always been.
You know, I really think we should stop calling these people conservative. It gives conservatism a bad name. We are talking about straight up racists and gangsters. Okay, you know, that's what we're talking about.
Right.
Well, there's no conservatism in the Trump administration. There's no ideology. It's gangsterism. That's what it is. Anyway, sorry, Ken, we got off the track.
Okay. Okay, let's get some. We got a little time for, we've asked one audience question, but we're going to get maybe a couple more in before we go. First one is a provocative question, so I'm going to ask this one. How can this movement, Black Lives Matter, become more relevant to those who feel this is a fight between white people and black people? ? My education was never comprehensive enough to deal with the injustices that created the America we live in. The zero-sum mentality seems to exhaust people of the ability to empathize with this movement. Question. Anybody want to take this up?
Well, it would seem to me that a movement whose value is really fully stated in the statement, we deserve to live our full humanity and dignity, is something everybody ought to be able to get with. I don't understand the difficulty this person is having. I don't even know how to deal with that.
And if we historicize that sort of like black versus white binary that the person presents, I mean, I just think we should look at that binary, right? And by and large, black folks, if it is a binary, and I don't think it is, but if it is a binary, black folks, definitely Mississippi, but writ large, have been so graceful in the face of utter cheating, right? Cheating at every level, economic cheating, socioeconomic cheating, educational cheating. So, like, if it is a battle, and again, I question that, choose your side. And I think if you want to be on the side of the cheaters, or do you want to be on the side of the people who have shown exquisite grace in the face of cheaters? I don't think it's really that complicated if you see it as a binary.
Mm-hmm.
Good point. And I would just add, in the 19th century, Frederick Douglass used to say something similar to white Northerners. You can either be on the side of slaveholders or not.
Right.
You're going to have to somehow decide. Now, if a person out there thinks that Black Lives Matter and this whole protest movement is somehow just trying to divide white and black people, they may be missing a lot of the point. The most remarkable thing about Black Lives Matter is just how, there's that word diverse. It has become as a movement. It is about something higher. It is about, it's saying to this country, you have some creeds,
Right.
and you still haven't lived up to them. We're still not there. We may never be there, but we're going to make you get there. So one of the things one can say about this question, Ken, is that, white people have to try hard, I think, to not take that question personally, to not take this whole phenomenon personally. This movement is not trying to just make you guilty. In fact, your guilt isn't very useful anyway. Knowledge is useful and action is useful. Guilt,
And or in the Baldwinian sense, take it personally, right? I agree with you. But and or actually take it personally.
And then do something. But Baldwin was always about doing something.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Right. Right.
Stop believing in these confections. That's what he called progress idea.
Right.
It's confection about American history.
Okay, I'm going to take two questions and combine them because they're sort of versions of the same question. So I'm going to read one and I'm going to sort of combine it with the one that's beneath it. So this one goes like this. Movements are temporal. Some give rise to a defining turning point with national or global impact. Others seem to wind down and find nuanced resonance in people's lives. What factors distinguish those that fall away and those that are radically transformative? Or how do we ride this moment, the wave that we're in right now, and not let it fizzle out? So, what makes certain moments transformative, others not transformative? How do we make this moment transformative? And maybe I read this into the question, and not something that fizzles out. Thoughts on that?
I mean, I think BLM, I think Black Lives Matter as a sentence, I think people talk about it as a phrase, but, as an English person, as a sentence, as a movement, as an organization, I think all three of those are forever. The efficacy of that forever is up for debate. But I think that organizers, and particularly the three women who created this movement / sentence / organization, I mean, I think it is forever, and I think the foreverness of it is partially what gets some of the most radical people a little like unhinged, right? Because people want to see like particular changes happen in the moment, but I think this thing is forever. I think the moment is forever, and again, I think until we as Americans in this nation, and I think globally too, stop cheating, because ultimately it's really about cheating. I think BLM as a sentence, as an organization, as a movement, is going to live forever. I really believe that, and that is as optimistic and as pessimistic as I can be, because it's going to live forever because white people are going to continue to cheat, and I think young black folks are going to continue to say Black lives and all of their iterations matter.
Others.
Well, I can from the little town of Oxford, what I have seen is that we started a little group there. I don't know, maybe 5 years ago, and ended up someone named us the Wise Women. And we participated in the Women's March in 2016. We walked around the square twice. KSA. We walked around the square twice, and we are now over 300 women.
Mm-hmm.
And we not all 300 show up for lunch every Friday pre-COVID, but good group used to come to lunch every Friday. Bunch of different kinds of activism jumped off of that group of 300 plus women. We're into immigration rights now. One woman, got upset when the poultry plants were raided, down in South in Mississippi, and she felt so bad. We have good-hearted people in Oxford, KSA, right? Good-hearted people. She's worried about these little children not having Christmas. This woman organized. She just reached out to this group and said, "Can somebody help me with this?" She raised $8,000 in one day. She went down to where these children were that weren't going to have a Christmas party. She gave them a Christmas party. And she got our people involved in immigration rights issues in Mississippi. This group of women, they're now getting together. They're having a thing now called The Conversation.
Right.
And this is white women talking to other white women about white supremacy. And they are serious. We've got a League of Women Voters rejuvenated all over again, explaining to their folks what's wrong with partisan gerrymandering. I mean, so, this is something that has not happened before. This is not them asking Black folks, what should they do? This is not about asking Black folks come to dinner. This is about them taking on their work.
Yeah.
And I think this is going to make a different future.
Yes.
Well, Ken, you won't surprise you. I'm gonna take a macro view here.
Mm-hmm.
BLM may be here forever. You're right. It'll mutate. It'll change. It'll have to in relation to events. Mm-hmm. But let's take the two examples we've discussed: the Great Abolition Movement before the Civil War, the War and Reconstruction. What happens in Reconstruction? The radicals take hold for about 4 or 5 years. They put in place a legal regime, for better or worse, that was beginning a transformation to some kind of experiment in racial equality. But then the reaction was so powerful. The counter-revolution was so powerful. So the answer to this question becomes, whichever social movement you're talking about, what victories does it win? How powerful is the reaction and the counter-resistance to it? And what happens in the broader general society, economy? The Panic of 1873, a terrible depression set in 1873 that itself, almost by itself, wiped out radical Reconstruction. What happened after the Civil Rights Revolution of the 1960s? Tremendous change in law, in politics. Black politicians are getting elected. All kinds of other movements, rights movements, are spawned by it. And we're still having the fruition of many of them. But what happened was a counter-revolution.
Yeah.
The counter-revolution came a little slower, but the 1970s had its huge economic downturn. Remember the oil boycott of 1973? Everyone was thinking about oil boycotts and no longer about affirmative action or any other issue. And then Reaganism. People forget this. In 1980, Ronald Reagan ran against the 60s.
Right.
Against the civil rights movement. And it worked. It worked. And today he's being honored left and right all the time. I can't stand it. Reagan was the single most divisive American president on race before Donald Trump. So it depends on what victories are won, what kind of victories by that social movement, deeply in law, deeply in political institutions, and then how big is the counter-revolution? That's what you need to look for. And these are two huge examples, at least in our own history. And you think about, I mean, what happened with the independence movement in India is another great example.
Mm-hmm.
But that we don't need to go into all of that. So.
Well, I think that this new shared reality is going to hold. And I think it's a shared reality among everybody except Fox News people. I think that's a part of what will make it hold. And Black folks, young Black people, have a new sense of their power and a new sense of that they deserve to live in their full humanity and dignity. It is Black students at the University of Mississippi who really led the effort to bring that statue down. And white folks came to understand that there was something wrong with that statue being there, but that was led by Black students, and now we're taking on the one that's on the square. But over in Tupelo, it's a young Black student who's leading the effort to take down the statue there. So there's a newness of energy and a shared understanding of what's wrong in this country that I think is going to take us somewhere.
And Barbara, you know. That's such an important point because what's at stake here? And so many Americans, I think, are becoming aware of this. It remains to be seen how they act. But a lot of people in this country now feel like this whole thing called the American experiment is really at stake.
Yeah.
This thing could just die.
For everybody.
Hey,
for everybody.
All empires have died. All nation states have died at some point. There's nothing that says this is permanent.
That's right.
This
is catastrophic. This is catastrophic.
You believe in America, you believe in capitalism, and you want it to work. We're in a moment now where you better wake up and realize the whole damn thing is at stake.
Yeah.
Okay.
It focuses the mind, doesn't it?
Trump, that's the one thing he's done well. He's focused the mind. White supremacy should have focused our mind before now. But this guy has been so obviously blatant with it that it can be ignored, except by his own party. And that's another story.
Okay. So we are just about at time. So we have like 1 minute. And I actually hate to ask another question, but I will ask you to kind of briefly. All three of you sort of touched on this, but
we got warmed up.
Let's future again. Black Lives Matter. Are you optimistic? Black Lives Matter and American democracy, right? So two things that are related. Are you optimistic, pessimistic, neutral? Where do we want to leave our audience tonight? Very briefly.
Briefly, I will say I'm optimistic, and I want people to stop delving into their imaginations about young Black people and read a book by Kathy Cohen, a political scientist at the University of Chicago, Democracy Remixed, Black Youth and the Future of American Politics. And when you get through with that, her two big research projects are the Gen Forward Survey, so that we know in real time what young Black people are thinking about, not what we think they're thinking about, and blackyouthproject.com. And that's what I think we need to learn about.
Optimistic, pessimistic, neutral?
Optimistic.
I'm afraid. I'm just afraid of how many more extremely vulnerable young Black people, but Black people writ large have to suffer and will have to die in order for us to actually like break this American experiment and rebuild it using love and liberation as the foundation. So I'm afraid of what progress will dictate, and I got to be honest and say that. And I'm really thankful to be here with y'all.
Let me basically take your position, Keza, because I think there's a lot of hell yet to pay.
Right.
I agree.
A lot of hell yet to pay. And on the democracy question, we have dysfunctional institutions. Let's just be straight about it. The United States Senate is not a democratic institution. The Electoral College belongs back in the 18th century. We need, I don't know about a constitutional convention, Ken, because we all know.
That's kind of frightening.
That's hard.
Well, that idea, yeah, exactly. Who will exploit that is the point. But we have institutions that really need revision. And that has to come out of this too.
Yeah.
So
Right.
until we do have some, there could be an election here. Let's say Biden wins by 10%, landslide, and we all celebrate, and Trump is in jail in a year and a half. So let's just, to be blunt. No, he'll be on the 9 o'clock hour on Fox News. But, we could wake up in a year or two and we still got basically the same institutional dysfunction.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And the same inequality.
Right.
And the same people have 4 houses and the same people have no house.
Right.
So we need a transformation within law. We don't want guillotines. We don't want a French Revolution.
No.
But it's got to happen from the grassroots. So I hope BLM is permanent,
Yeah.
because it's the
And
closest thing we've had in modern times to a genuine grassroots protest movement that has now developed a coalition.
Yeah.
That's the secret. There's a coalition behind this that has to
We're
be
going
made.
to have a lot of cleaning up to do. We don't even know all the destruction that's been done over the past several years. And then we've got to find that way forward. We got to make that way forward. Those people in Mississippi, KSA, they talk about make a way out of no way.
That's
Make
love.
that way out of no way.
That's right.
That's where we are.
I just hope Susan Rice has the energy when she's Secretary of State to go out and try to repair every relationship the United States has in the world too, because we don't live just here. We live in a globe.
Absolutely.
We live in a globe that gets smaller every day, and we got to really repair our relationships with the rest of the planet.
Yeah.
Great point.
All right. So that's great. It's a great set of points to end on. Barbara, Kiese, David, thank you for this excellent conversation. Audience members, thank you. I know we didn't get to all of your questions, but actually, as I looked at them, I saw a bunch of them that were addressed in various comments that were made, even if we didn't pose them explicitly. So thank you for being with us. If you haven't already, audience members, please remember you can purchase the books of our panelists through a Bunch of Grapes bookstore or your local independent bookstore. They're important additions to our conversation on racial justice, right? There's lots of parts of that conversation. Parts of it are writing and reading books. thank you again to the audience. This is the final event for the 2020 Martha's Vineyard Author Series. We've had over 3,000 people join these events, live streamed this year. We hope you found it worthwhile. And as Sue Ellen said at the beginning, the author series needs your support. And we hope that you will support these free events, and that's what makes them free, your support, through your donations. And we look forward to seeing you all in person for the book festival, post-COVID, hopefully, next August 7th and 8th of 2021.
TSA, you got to come up here.
Yeah, it's worth seeing, Dick.
Come up here and blow
Go
it
to
up.
visit the vineyard.
Blow it up.
You might want a second house after you visit the vineyard.
Oh, thank you.
In the meantime, everybody, stay healthy, wear masks, wash your hands, and act for racial justice. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Paul, for
Thank
everything.
you. Thank
Thank
you, everyone.
See you at home, Barbara.
Yeah.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Okay, good to meet you all.